like to restate the resolution that says people should have complete autonomy when it comes to making decisions about their bodies. These decisions may range from reproductive rights to wearing seatbelts to organ donation because my body, my choice. My group and I agree with this statement. I will begin with a quote by Abraham Lincoln. The shepherd drives the wolf from the sheep for which the sheep begs the shepherd as his liberator, while the wolf denounces him for the same act as the destroyer of liberty. Plainly, the sheep and the wolf are not agreed upon definition of liberty. This quote would help justify our four main points that are individuality, self-expression, manipulation from people in power, and lastly, you knowing your body better than anyone else. Individuality is a strong word. It is defined as each person being set apart from one another, having power on thoughts, opinions, and decisions. Many times, though, we are not allowed to express our individuality because we are restricted from going above and beyond. On the freemanonline.org, it says, all around us, there are spheres of authority always dictating what we should do, how we should act, and what we ought not to do. The article goes into further detail about how we were raised to follow higher powers that stop us from being able to freely express our strengths and our weaknesses. Furthermore, it is a biological fact that the only thing you will always have actually ownership of is your body and mind. You don't leave the womb with anything else. Your concept of self only exists to you through your mind, and your mind cannot exist without a host body. The body is merely a vessel for you, which in turn signifies that when you surrender control of your body, it ultimately surrenders the control of yourself. The phrase, my body, my choice, was meant to help define individuality, because we people are not robots. We have feelings and different perspectives in life that set us apart. This word has been around and used for centuries. For example, on Verticana.com it says, in the United States, individualism became part of the core American ideology by the 19th century, incorporating the influences of New England Puritanism, Jeffersonianism, and philosophy of natural rights. The word has been around the world and back and still stays the same, with fighting for the rights to be set apart as your own.
So on to our second point, pertaining to the idea of self-expression. We would argue that everyone deserves to choose how they want to express themselves with their physical body. According to the Georgetown Behavioral Institute, self-expression plays a significant role in developing our capacity to relate to others and engage in relationships. Losing the ability to express yourself is known to cause repressed emotions and therefore intense anxiety, mood swings, and depression symptoms. An excellent example is school uniforms, which largely limit pupils' ability to express themselves and can be shown to have negative effects on students. According to the South Bend Tribune, Washington High School in the state of Indiana did a survey among their students. It found that 82% of their students strongly disapproved of their uniform policy. Students were so distressed and uncomfortable with the system that many of them began moving schools, and eventually the enrollment rate was brought down by 43%. There were frequent dress code violations and students with seniors at their front lines. They were constantly voicing their discomfort and dissatisfaction with their lack of control over the way they dressed, arguing both for looks and in dressing for comfort. But this isn't just an American issue. We would also like to recognize an international example of this idea. The current and recent school systems in Japan. In Japan, rules are implemented in the vast majorities of schools that strictly control almost every aspect of how a student manages their experience, especially when it comes to having straight black hair. BBC News wrote on the project, school rules prevent pupils from getting their hair permed or colored, bleached, or braided. There are also multiple accounts of teachers cutting girls' hair and humiliating them for being off dress code. In fact, 12-year-old Japanese student Tomo Morihashi was quoted from BBC News on the subject of her frustration with the Japanese school system, telling news sources that tights must not be colored, hair must not be dyed, the colors of elastics is fixed, and they must not be worn on the wrist. BBC News goes on to say that pupils, particularly girls, are often not allowed to wear tights or coats, even in freezing weather. The Japan Today website references that in many schools, pupils are often required to wear white underwear, and before March of 2021, Teachers were allowed to line up female students and check under their skirts in order to make sure they were undressed good. The lack of control or basic rights given to students within the Japanese school system is showing terrible results. Within the last 30 years, Japanese student suicide rates was the highest it's ever been. This statistic was frightening enough that it actually drew the attention of the Japanese government. It becomes evident with these cases the extent of the negative effects that a lack of control over your body can have. Being unable to control what happens to your body is a vital and important human right and can have a serious psychological consequence, as was discussed in the previous text. Thank you.
And this is a photo of the Japanese students having to wear their uniforms.
All right, and on to our third point. Now, this point is less about why having bodily autonomy is good, and more so why not having it can cause dangers and issues you wouldn't normally think about every day. So, bodily autonomy, or a lack thereof, you can find many examples of it throughout history, of it being taken away from people. This is often used to control and oppress people who are lower than their leader, perceived as lower than their leader. Now, being unable to control what happens to your body means that someone or something else can control what happens to your body, and that idea in and of itself is not always harmful or world-ending. But in some circumstances, it can certainly open a door for more harmful situations. For example, everyone remembers the takeover of Afghanistan earlier this year by the Taliban. The Taliban is forcing women to wear burqas, abstain from wearing makeup, speaking, leaving the house without a man, or even walking too loud. And men are being forced to grow beards as well. Almost all Afghani citizens are at the mercy of their Talib oppressors. The Taliban is taking away Afghan bodily autonomy in order to control and oppress citizens, especially women and young girls. On another note, a more prominent and devastating example is the Holocaust. According to HolocaustEncyclopedia.org, Auschwitz, one of the most cruel and evil German concentration camps, forced prisoners who were mainly Jewish to receive identification tattoos without their consent. Now, in the Torah, which is the Jewish guidebook, it states clearly that you shall not etch a tattoo on yourself. Without the right was being done to these Jewish people, and more horrible things were also being done. So the Nazis denied them their right to bodily autonomy and potentially, screwed up a lot of their faith. Now, these two examples make it clear what the consequences are when you take away someone's bodily autonomy. Thank you very much.
Moving on to our last point, we believe that people should have complete bodily autonomy because you know your body and your circumstances better than almost anyone else, mainly pertaining to your health. Our bodies have evolved to provide us with feedback about possible illnesses, distress, hunger, sleep, and other biologically vital processes. You are the only one who knows exactly, for instance, how an ache or pain feels to you. You are biologically and psychologically capable of listening to your body and understanding the way your body reacts to certain circumstances. Take asthma, for example. Over time, people with asthma will know exactly what triggers an asthma attack, regardless of what other people expect what triggers their asthma. That person will know exactly what triggers it. As stated by the Minnesota Department of Health, asthma triggers are not the same for each and every person. They are unique to each individual, and every person's lungs react differently to each specific trigger. And because that person understands their body, it is their choice to decide when and if an inhaler is needed. Another example is euthanasia, a topic we discussed earlier in the year. The idea of a patient-assisted suicide is heavily debated, and the right to a peaceful death is argued to be one that only a patient should make the decision for. According to medicinenet.com, a patient who is dying can tell biologically that they are approaching death. Because of the understanding between the mind and the body, many near-death patients are capable of deciding if they want a peaceful death or if they want to continue to live their life. Because others don't fully understand the state of a person's body, they are unable to make that decision for the patient. Both of these examples make evident that persons should have complete control over their bodies because only they know what's best for them. This concept can apply to many serious medical decisions and also many minor decisions. At the end of the day, you are evolutionarily constructed to understand and make decisions for the needs of your own body. To conclude our argument, it's a person's right to have complete bodily autonomy when deciding what happens with their bodies. Author Malibo Stafodi said, "We should at all times insist that we belong to ourselves and have the agency to make decisions about our own lives. Our voices, whether loud or soft, matter. Our behavior, whether seen as good or bad, remains our choice. People should have full control over what is done with their bodies for the following reasons previously mentioned. Individuality, self-expression, manipulation by people in power, and the fact that you know your body better than anyone else. So the phrase, my body, my choice, is justified by the right to own one's body and the fact that others do not and should not have the rights to a vessel that doesn't belong to them." Thank you.